Hey guys, another video for our how to do stuff in Japan playlist and our mini series on raising children in Japan. So in the last video we got as far as the baby being born. So yay, baby's born, fantastic. Usually what happens, as we mentioned in the last video, is the mother usually goes home to the family home. So she goes home to her parents' house to live, to stay for about a month usually. It varies based on how quickly she recovers and how quickly the baby sort of gets happening and whether her parents work or not, and a whole heap of variables, but usually a month is considered to be pretty normal. So what's considered normal is actually going to be a big part of this series. So where to start? One thing is, during the pregnancy, usually the mothers have a book and they record at set times throughout the pregnancy. They record their weight and their different health things and blood pressure and all sorts of stuff. And then once the baby's born, usually the mothers continue with that book, particularly with what they eat. While pregnant and after the baby's born, mothers usually are very, very super conscious of what they eat. In some cultures, when ladies are pregnant or even after the baby's born, quite often, they'll eat whatever they want, because it's the sort of the thinking is that they're eating for two people and whatever they crave is probably what they need, is probably good for them, that sort of thing. That's what some people seem to think. Whereas in Japan, they tend to, because people eat healthily, usually eat healthily, once somebody's pregnant and through to after the baby's born, usually they eat even more healthily than normal, so they become super conscious of what they eat. So that's why when you look at a lot of Japanese ladies when they're pregnant, it really just looks like a pillow up their shirt, because the rest of their body usually doesn't put on a lot of weight, and there's a bump where the baby is, and then after the baby's born, most of the mothers just go back to looking what they looked like before they got pregnant. And it's because, while they were pregnant and then after the baby was born, they just eat really healthy food, rice and fish and miso and all that sort of healthy stuff, and they avoid anything that's going to make them put on weight, or not because they're trying to avoid putting on weight, it's just that huge focus on being healthy. So usually Japanese people are focused on being healthy, but then when they're pregnant even more so. And then after the baby's born too, things like even green tea and things like that, they actually have special tea for mothers to drink while they're pregnant and also after the baby's born. Nimpu tea, I'm not sure, nimpu or cha, something like that it's called, but it's special tea that doesn't have any caffeine in it or any of the things that the pregnant mothers aren't supposed to have. So that all goes into books. So there's usually a book that the mother has while she's pregnant, record everything, and then after the baby's born, usually the mother continues to fill out the book regularly about her own health, and then there's a new book about the baby's health, and everything's recorded regularly, the sizes and weight and all sorts of stuff. Temperature's a big thing with kids in Japan. Parents are always taking temperature of kids all the time. It's a really big thing, over the top. In summer, kids who go to kindergarten, the parents have to take their temperature every morning before they go to kindergarten, and then when they get to the kindergarten in the morning, they have to write down the kid's temperature in a book, and then write next to it whether the kid is allowed to go swimming that day or not, because at kindergarten in summer, quite often they go for a swim or have a shower or something like that. So the parents every day have to record the kid's temperature, and because of course if the kid's temperature's sort of over 37.5 or something, then considered to have a fever and either probably shouldn't be at kindergarten or definitely or they think shouldn't be swimming. So same for babies, really conscious of temperature, always taking the temperature and how much fluid they're drinking and all sorts of stuff. So there's all that's all recorded, and then touched on just before about what's normal. That's, as with always in Japan, that's the underlying theme, in all the how-to videos that we've done on all different topics. That's the underlying theme, is Japanese people usually gauge what's normal based on what other Japanese people do, which is sort of natural, isn't it? People do it in a lot of countries, but here, doing what everybody else does, as we mentioned lots of times before, tends to be the underlying thing, and it continues to be the case with babies, which if you're a foreigner, so if you're a foreign husband married to a Japanese lady and your baby's born, or if you're a foreign lady married to a Japanese husband and you have a baby in Japan, just after the baby's born can be tricky, because all of a sudden a lot of this sort of stuff will kick in. I mean, while you're pregnant too, or while the lady's pregnant too, of course, there's all that other stuff that we just mentioned before. But once the baby's born, obviously, as a parent, you want an equal say in what happens with your own child, but it's not necessarily going to be the way it's going to be. Usually, the way it works in Japan usually is the sensei is the one who basically says the way things should be. And that could be the sensei at school, or the sensei at university, or the sensei at work, or whoever it is that's the considered to be the expert on the topic is going to be the one who's going to say how it is. And usually if the baby's born at a clinic or even at a hospital, quite often there's a mamatachi group, so it's a mother's group, and it's usually the mothers who have kids that were born around the time that your kid was born. So it'll be the ones that were born the week or two before yours was born, and a week or two after yours was born, and you guys have probably gone through all sorts of classes together during the pregnancy. So there's all sorts of prenatal classes, and there's like yoga classes for mothers and all sorts of good stuff, lots of good stuff, and usually you've done that sort of once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week during the pregnancy. So usually there's a connection between the mothers group there, and that's usually continued outside the clinic, which means you'll go to each other's houses and that sort of thing. And then within that period where the babies are born, usually you'll visit each other because you're going to the same clinic or the same hospital, and the mothers are all there, having babies and all in beds beside each other, and so usually there's a bit of a bond and a bit of a connection there. So that mother's group, and then usually running those mothers groups will be sort of either a doctor or a sister, nursing sister, and so that person will be one of the senseis that's telling you how the way things should be. And it's really typical the way things are done in Japan. The sensei, whoever that is, if that nursing sister or the doctor or whoever it is says something, and all the mothers will just do it, which means that sometimes there's some things. So, for example, when it comes to the medical thing, Japan's pretty good. They've kept up with all the medical technology, and in fact, in some things they're actually ahead. But when it comes to actual technology of medicine, they've kept up. But when it comes to some things like bedside manner, or just things about psychology in particular, things like that, and the way that they treat kids, and what's considered normal here compared with what's considered normal in other places, sometimes as a parent you won't like it, you might not be comfortable with it, or you'll know that there's a better way, and some of these things, lots of examples. One of the examples is when kids are crying, and some of you might remember a video we did a long time ago about pain and suffering and hardship in Japan, it was called, or something like that. And in Japanese culture, suffering and hardship is considered to be a normal thing, and it's something that you just accept as being normal. And trying to avoid suffering and hardship is just a cop-out and not cool. So you should just always accept suffering and hardship as just the way it is. Which is sort of a Buddhist thing, but it's an extension of the Buddhist thing. It really is. Quite often there'll be expectations to accept hardship and suffering that's not necessary. But trying to get out of that hardship or suffering just makes you seem weak or something, like you're trying to cop out. If you haven't seen that video already, worth looking at. So they apply that to kids, they apply that to babies, and they apply it to kids from from as soon as they're born, which means letting them cry. And in a lot of countries, well, most people sort of accept that when kids are really, really little, when babies are newborn, that having a good cry is actually good for their lungs, because they're not getting any exercise. They're just lying around like a little bag of potatoes, and they're not getting any exercise. So having a good cry is good exercise for their lungs, and that's pretty well accepted, isn't it, by most people. However, in Japan, it's taken one step further, or a lot of steps further probably, and they'll just let them cry. They just let them cry, and this will go on for years. And I've actually had this discussion with mothers, with kids that are 2, 3, 4 years old, bawling their eyes out, and the mothers will say, "Oh no, it's good for them." And you say, "Well, no, actually, it's good for newborns because they're not getting any exercise, but 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are running around. So, crying isn't going to do them any physical good. They're getting their exercise from running around, they don't need the exercise from crying." But it's sort of this let them suffer sort of thing. And it's pretty prevalent in Japanese culture. There'll be a lot more examples of this in different videos, but it's very prevalent. Just let them suffer, let people suffer, and then they'll come out the other end of it, and they'll accept it, or they'll get used to it or something. And so if you're one of the parents, it can drive you nuts, because the baby will be crying, and the mother, the Japanese parent will be in the same room. So if you're the guy, the mother, or if you're a girl, the father, but the Japanese parent will be in the same room as the crying baby and might not pick it up, might just let it cry and just continue doing whatever they're doing. And you see this all the time. You see it with your own kids, but you'll see it with other people's kids too. They just ignore it. You'll see mothers standing around here, around kindergartens and schools and parks and things, standing around talking to each other, and there'll be a kid falls over, or there'll be a kid bawling their eyes out, and the mothers all just stand there and talk. And you might remember a video we made once about laughing. They'll quite often laugh. We made a video about this once before. If there's an uncomfortable situation, they laugh to show you that it's all okay. And so one of the kids will fall over and start crying, and the mothers will be standing there watching, and they'll just laugh. And it just seems really ruthless, heartless, cold shit. It really does. And it's not, it's just a cultural difference, but when it's your kid, it can be really hard to take. And you've got to be ready for this, because it can be a real tough one. And if you're a new parent and haven't experienced this before, there's some stuff that kicks in when you become a parent, where your child's happiness and well-being just kicks in as being the most important thing in the world. Nothing's more important than that. So that means that when the other parent of your child is ignoring your kid's suffering, it can be really hard to take. And then you got the complication then of, if you react to that and say, "What's your story?" You're sitting right beside the kid. You're not picking the baby up and holding it, making it feel better. What are you doing? You're not doing anything, And they'll just look at you like you're weird, because the mama touchy group, so the mothers, the other mothers, and the sensei all do the same thing and all think that that's normal. And that'll be what you'll be up against, because if the sensei says it's okay as far as they're concerned. And the fact that you can get on the internet and find examples from all around the world, and all sorts of well-respected clinics and doctors, and all sorts of well-respected universities from around the world, and quite often this is the case with lots of stuff like this in Japan, is particularly cultural and social stuff to do with psychology and interaction with other people and things like that, is that in some ways, when it comes to that psychology and social sort of stuff, in some ways Japan can be really behind. It can be 50, 60 years behind. And then in particular, relationship stuff in particular, stuff that's been obvious. If you've lived outside Japan for the last, any time in the last 30 or 40 years, stuff that's considered perfectly normal. Of course, You know, showing compassion to kids and listening to kids' problems and you know, showing compassion is important for children, and all these things that we just sort of accept as being normal. And if you do them here, it's like, what are you making a fuss about? And the fact that the rest of the world might agree with you, and then we've mentioned this on the how-to playlist before, just because the rest of the world might agree with you, and we've seen this in the comments on a lot of these videos too. When we talk about stuff like this, people in the comments from around the world will say, that's ridiculous, that's ridiculous. And in this raising kids in Japan, no doubt we're going to have lots of comments like that. People are saying that's ridiculous. We'll say for sure, that's ridiculous, that's ridiculous, that's 50 years, 60 years ago style of thinking, that's ridiculous. And that's what happens. And so everybody outside Japan agrees with you, and your family in your home country agree with you, and they can't believe it either, and everybody is agreeing with you, except nobody in Japan agrees with you, and the doctor doesn't agree with you, and the Mamatachi group doesn't agree with you, and the mother doesn't agree with you, and that's what matters. It doesn't matter. We live in Japan, and I'll tell you that. You live in Japan. It doesn't matter what anybody outside Japan thinks. And they'll tell you, it's normal. It's normal, they say. It's normal. And you say, well, yeah, it's normal here. It's normal in this country, but it's not normal outside this country. Oh, well, it's normal here. And that's the end of it, isn't it? Obviously. Because their family, oh yeah, and of course the family, we're talking about the Mamatachi group and the sensei, well, obviously your partner's parents too, because they're going to agree with the sensei. So the sensei and the partner's parents and partner's aunt and uncle and the in-laws and all the partner's family and the sensei and the Mamatachi group are all going to be agreeing with each other and saying, no, let the kid cry, it's good for him, it's good for him. And you'll say, well, no, you can't let him cry all day. That's ridiculous. That's not good for him, you know. If he's got a problem, he's trying to tell you he's got a problem. Pick him up, find out what the problem is, you know. No, it's very robotic, you know. Like a lot of Japanese social stuff, it's very robotic. So there's a certain time of day, you know, for a certain frequency that you'll feed the kid, and there'll be a certain frequency that you'll change nappies, and there's a certain frequency that it's very robotic. Very robotic. And you know, if the kid's not due for a feed for another hour, but he's crying because he's hungry, well, no, he's just going to have to be patient. He's just going to have to endure and be patient for another hour because he's not due for feeding for another hour. You know, that's his problem. He has to just take it like a man. You 2-month-old child. So yeah, and this sets the tone, guys, because this is what it's like. What it's like living in Japan in general, but when it comes to raising kids in Japan, this is exactly what it's like. And at first, it can be the most difficult part at first, because you have to adjust to this, you know, and the realization, the reality of a lot of this stuff will really hit home, because it'll be like, wow, okay, you know, and a lot of new emotions and complications, because until now it's just been you that's had to conform, and now you've got a new child that you really care about who has to conform as well. So tricky. Anyway, there it was, part 2, raising a child in Japan. More videos coming soon.